Peace be with you. Welcome to another edition of Let the Quran Speak. My name is Sophia. I'm your host. Jihad, a term that conjures up terrible images of terrorists, bombs, mass killings. Of course, many Muslims would say that that isn't the true meaning of jihad. So we'll be looking at what Islam actually has to say about jihad. With me, Brother Shabir Ali from the Islamic Information Center. Brother Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Before we discuss the concept of jihad, we'll look at a chapter from the Quran. This is one of the shortest chapter of the Quran. Surah Ikhlas, translated in many different ways. One way, Sincerity. Can you tell me maybe what the verses are about?
It is one of the shorter chapters of the Quran.
Is it the shortest?
Of the shortest. No, shortest would be Surah 108 in Untitled Chapter.
Okay.
But for this one is a short one. Many kids would have memorized this as one of the first chapters that they would memorize. It begins by saying, He is God, one, God the Eternal. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is none like unto him.
So a fitting chapter for a child to learn, because they learn about who God is.
Yes, it is one of the most important teachings in the Islamic faith, the question of tawheed, or the teaching about tawheed, the idea that there is only one God who is incomparable, who is the creator of everything, and who is not like any of the things that we see or anything that we even imagine.
When was this chapter revealed? Was it one of the earlier chapters to be revealed?
It is a Meccan chapter, a chapter that was revealed in the early phase of the Prophet's ministry. So it would be one of the chapters that was used to emphasize the belief in one God, in contradistinction to the many gods that people worshipped in the Arabian environment at the time.
So tell me a little bit about this notion of tawheed that you mentioned, this notion of oneness.
Well, the Quran repeats again and again the promise of paradise for those who believe in God and in the last day. Belief in God entails for Muslims that God is only one. He is not like anything that we can imagine. This follows from the Old Testament, where the Ten Commandments are given to Moses, as described in the book of Exodus chapter 20, and also in Deuteronomy chapter 5. Chapter 5. There, the Ten Commandments begin by the emphasis on one God who is not like anything that walks on the earth or swims in the ocean or flies in the sky. The Ten Commandments insist that we should not make any graven images for God, and we should not bow down and worship such images. So God is the invisible creator of the heavens and the earth. It is this one God that the Quran insists is the only God. In the book of Deuteronomy, in chapter 6, verse 4, we have the most important declaration of faith in the Jewish tradition. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. It is that declaration which is to be written on material that would be tied to the wrists, would be placed on the forehead, and would also be nailed to the doorposts as a constant reminder, lest anyone should forget this. And it is a similar declaration that we find in the Quran, for example, in Surah 2, verse 163. وَإِلَهُكُمْ إِلَهٌ وَاحِدٌ لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا هُوَ الرَّحْمَنُ الرَّحِيمُ. And your God is only one God, there is no God but Him, the Beneficent, the Merciful One. We have it here also in Surah 112, which is the subject of our discussion. Say, He is God, one. So there is an emphasis on God being one, full stop.
Okay, the chapter also talks about God begetting not begetting, and not being begotten either. What does that refer to?
Yeah, so in the immediate context, it would be referring to the idea that was prevalent in Arabia at the time, that God would have offsprings. We know from ancient Greek mythology that the gods always have families, they have offspring, so you have the son of the god and so on. In Arabia, the Quraysh people had the idea that God had sons and daughters. So many of the passages that were revealed at the time in that early phase refutes the idea of these pagan Arabs that God would have chosen for himself a son, or that he would take the angels as daughters. They had three deities that were referred to as Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat, which they called the daughters of God. So the Quran constantly tries to drive home to them the idea of the biblical God, the God of Moses and Abraham, the God that is one and that is incomparable. He begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is none like unto him.
So you're saying that this chapter is actually hearkening back to previous scriptures then?
Yes,
the messages of previous scriptures.
Yes, if one were to read the book of Isaiah, for example, in the Old Testament, Isaiah chapter 43, 44, and 45, you will find that these three chapters reverberate with the constant declaration that there is only one God. Before God declares, before me no God was formed, nor has one been formed after me. Besides me there is no other. He asks, when I created the world, who was with me? And so on. He just keeps emphasizing that he is only one, and besides him there is no other. There is a constant insistence also that he has no compeer. It's not that we can compare the number 4 with the number 1,000,000, and we can see that one is a greater number than the other, but at least they're comparable in that they're both numbers. In the case of God, there is God alone, and everything else are his creatures. So there is no compeer. There is no lesser and greater God. There is just simply one God, and there is nothing more to be said about it.
Can you explain the second verse about God being eternal and absolute? What does that really refer to?
Well, the whole chapter seems to follow in a logical way. By declaring that there is only one God, there is also the declaration that God is eternal and absolute, which means that he exists by himself. If one is asking, okay, how could one God create everything? Well, this is possible for God because he does not need anything, and everything else depends upon him. And the fact that he is eternal really sets up the stage for the following declaration, that he begets not, nor is he begotten. Because if you have one God, and then this God has an offspring, then you will have one that is like him. You will have two. And since there is only one, it follows by logical necessity that there is this God is not begotten himself. Otherwise, he would have a father, and the father would be God as well. And it will follow that if he has a son, and the son is like the father, and therefore similar to God. And then you would have two of the same type. But there is only one God, as this chapter declares.
All right, thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Stay with us when we return, the hot topic of jihad.